The cold hospital air sent a shiver down my spine as I stood before the application form. My hands trembled slightly, but my grip on the pen was firm. The words stared back at me: voluntary forensic assignment, remote region. I signed it. A murmur of admiration rippled through my colleagues. Emily, only 2 people signed up this time. Life there is tough. You must really love this job. I forced a smile but didn't reply. They thought I was noble, selfless, dedicated. But my reasons had nothing to do with passion. I just wanted to get away, far away, from him. Ethan. I had wasted 8 years of my life on him, 3 years of dating, 5 years of marriage. I had sacrificed everything, given up opportunities, lost friendships, and made myself small just to fit into his world. And what did I get in return? A broken heart and a bed that no longer smelled like my own. Not this time. This time, I would disappear. The hospital corridors buzzed with life. Doctors rushed from one ward to another, nurses scurried past with charts, and a steady hum of beeping monitors filled the air. It was familiar, yet today, it all felt foreign to me. My mind drifted back to the beginning, to the moment I first met Ethan. He had stumbled into the emergency room, blood trickling down the side of his head, his crisp suit stained. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and staggered slightly, pressing a hand to his temple. I had been on shift for 16 hours straight, exhaustion clouding my vision, but somehow, his presence had jolted me awake. I stitched him up myself. I remembered how he had shielded me that night, standing between me and an enraged patient's family. I remembered the warmth in his voice when he had said, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Your husband is your personal lawyer." Back then, I had laughed, touching his bandaged forehead playfully. Then you don't have to be afraid either. If you ever get hurt again, I'll be your personal doctor. How naive I had been. The Ethan who once protected me was gone. Now, the only thing he shielded was another woman in my place. I arrived home late that evening. The house was silent. Empty. It had been this way for months. I dropped my bag by the door, rubbing my temples before picking up my phone. 5 missed calls. I hesitated before redialing the number. The line rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Finally, a sharp voice cut through. "Emily, will you stop already? Why do you love checking up on me so much? I told you I'm working. Can't you be more understanding?" The words stung, but I remained silent. Then, a voice, soft, feminine, sweet, floated from the other end. "Ethan, you can't be distracted when you're working." Laughter followed. I froze. The sound of his chuckle felt like a blade against my skin. "This isn't the kind of lesson I expect from you, Madison. When did you grow up and start lecturing your boss?" My heart clenched. The phone was still connected. He had placed it down and forgotten about it, leaving me like a thief, eavesdropping on my own husband's affair. For 3 years, I had convinced myself it was all in my head. That I was paranoid. That I was misinterpreting things. No more. I hung up, my fingers numb. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My chest felt tight, as if the walls of my ribs were caving in, but no tears came. I just stood there, frozen in place, listening to the silence of my own home. Hours later, the bedroom door creaked open. Ethan stood at the doorway, his phone still in hand, the screen glowing in the dark. "Emily, you didn't hear anything just now, did you?" I turned away, pulling the blanket over my head. I had no energy to fight. No will to argue. A hesitant hand reached out, brushing my hair back. "Were you crying?" I wanted to laugh. Instead, I whispered, "Ethan, can you keep your distance from Madison?" Silence. Then, a low chuckle. "Emily, don't start. She's my subordinate. We have to work together." I had heard those words before. 3 years ago. Before I caught them in bed together. This time, I didn't wait for his excuses. I sat up, met his gaze, and asked coldly, "Tell me the truth. No more lies. No more work excuses. Just say it." He stiffened, his jaw clenching. "Fine. You want the truth?" His eyes darkened. "I prefer being at the office." "Do you know why?" "Because you're boring." My breath caught in my throat. At work, Madison makes me laugh. She helps me deal with difficult cases. We have things in common. You and I? We have nothing to talk about. Do you get it now? The words cut deeper than any scalpel I had ever held. I stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any flicker of remorse. There was none. Finally, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, standing up. My throat was dry, my voice hoarse. "I see." I walked past him, heading toward the kitchen for a glass of water. But before I could step out of the room, his hand wrapped around my wrist, stopping me. His voice softened. "Emily, I didn't mean it. I was just angry. Don't take it seriously, okay?" I turned, meeting his eyes. "Actually, there's something I wanted to discuss with you." I exhaled, already knowing what was coming. "Can Madison stay with us for a few days?" He hesitated before adding, "She just got promoted. She doesn't have the money for a place yet. And we have a guest room anyway." I pried his fingers off my wrist. A bitter laugh slipped past my lips before I could stop it. "Sure." The next morning, Madison arrived. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Instead, she stepped inside and smiled. "Emily, don't just stand there. Help me move my stuff." I said nothing, glancing at Ethan, who was already grabbing her bags, running around like an eager host. My fists clenched involuntarily. As I reached for one of her suitcases, she suddenly rushed forward, snatching it away from me. "Emily, what are you doing? This has all my mother's belongings. If you break them, I won't be able to live with myself." Ethan immediately pushed me aside, his attention fully on her. "Are you okay? Nothing's damaged, right?" A cold laugh escaped me. I turned and walked away without another word. Inside our bedroom, Ethan stormed in after me. His voice was sharp. "Emily, enough. You were the one who agreed to let her stay, and now you're acting like this? Do you know how embarrassing that is for me?" I said nothing. Because I knew. I had spent years trying to fit into his world. And now, standing before me, I saw it clearly, I was never part of it to begin with. This time, I wouldn't beg. This time, I wouldn't fight. This time, I would walk away. And Ethan wouldn't see it coming. The morning sun streamed through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. My face was tired, hollow, a ghost of the woman I used to be. In the other room, laughter rang out. Madison. Her giggles echoed through the house like nails against glass. Ethan's voice followed, softer, more intimate than it had ever been with me in years. I clenched my fists. I had endured enough. By the time I stepped into the kitchen, they were already there, Madison perched on the counter, swinging her legs, Ethan standing close, his hand resting on her knee. They froze when they saw me. Madison smirked. "Oh, Emily. Good morning. I didn't see you there." I ignored her, walking to the fridge. The tension in the room thickened. Ethan cleared his throat. "Emily, about last night, I don't want to hear it," I interrupted, grabbing a glass of water. My voice was eerily calm, detached. Ethan sighed. "You're being dramatic. I told you, Madison just needs a place to stay for a few days." A few days. That was the lie he had fed me. But I knew better. Madison wasn't leaving. And neither was I. Not yet. That evening, I sat in the dimly lit living room, my laptop open on the coffee table. The screen displayed my resignation letter. I hovered over the send button, hesitating. Leaving the city meant leaving behind everything I had built, my career, my home, my identity. But it also meant freedom. Before I could make a decision, my phone rang. Ethan's mother. I inhaled sharply before answering. Hello? Emily, she said, her voice carrying that familiar condescending tone. I'd like to meet. My grip on the phone tightened. Why? A pause. Then, it's important. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. She was already there, sipping her usual black coffee, her nails tapping impatiently against the table. I slid into the seat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. Say what you need to say. She studied me for a moment before setting down her cup. I'll be blunt. You should divorce Ethan. I didn't flinch. I had expected this. She continued, it's obvious you two aren't working out. And let's be honest, Madison is a much better match for him. She understands his world. She sighed dramatically. You never belonged. There it was. The final blow. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. How much? She blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? How much are you offering? I repeated, my voice steady. A slow smile spread across her lips. 50,000. I nodded. Make it 100. She laughed. You're bold, I'll give you that. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You want me gone? Pay the price. She studied me for a long moment before nodding. Fine. You'll have the money by tomorrow. I stood, smoothing my coat. Then we have a deal. As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't in years of power. The next morning, I found Madison in the kitchen, humming to herself as she made coffee. She turned, flashing me a smug smile. Sleep well? I smiled back, my expression unreadable. Madison, I need you to move out. Her brow furrowed. What? You heard me, I said, pouring myself a cup of tea. You're no longer welcome here. She scoffed. Ethan won't allow it. I sipped my tea, unfazed. Ethan doesn't get a say in this. Before she could argue, the front door swung open. Ethan stood there, looking disheveled. Emily, what the hell is going on? I set my cup down, meeting his eyes. I'm leaving, Ethan. His expression flickered, shock, then anger. Leaving? What do you mean? I pulled a folder from the counter, handing it to him. Divorce papers. Sign them. The room fell into silence. Ethan's gaze darted to Madison, who looked equally stunned. Emily, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, I said, turning toward the door. I hope you two have a wonderful life together. And with that, I walked away, leaving behind the man I had once loved. For the first time in years, I was free. The air outside was crisp as I stepped onto the pavement, my suitcase rolling behind me. The city I had called home for 8 years suddenly felt foreign, as if I were walking through the ruins of a life that no longer belonged to me. A taxi pulled up at the curb. I slid inside, giving the driver an address, Jessica's flower shop. My oldest friend. The one person who had never abandoned me, even when I had lost myself in Ethan's world. As the car sped through the streets, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Ethan. I let it ring. Then again. And again. With a sigh, I answered. What? Emily, let's talk. Don't just walk away like this. His voice was strained, desperate. But I had given him enough chances. Ethan, I'm done talking. We have nothing left to say. My voice was calm, steady. Nothing left to say? He scoffed. You're really going to throw everything away just like that? No, Ethan, I murmured. You already did. I hung up. The driver cast a sideways glance at me but said nothing. The city blurred past as I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. I had always imagined that leaving Ethan would feel like breaking into pieces. But instead, I felt whole for the first time in years. Jessica's flower shop smelled of lavender and fresh soil. She turned as I entered, her eyes widening in shock. Emily? Her voice was soft, disbelieving. You actually did it? I nodded, dropping my suitcase with a small thud. I left. She didn't hesitate. Within seconds, her arms were wrapped around me, squeezing tight. Took you long enough, she whispered. I laughed, though it was shaky. I know. She pulled back, studying my face. Are you okay? I exhaled. I think I will be. Jessica motioned toward the back. You still want to go to Tibet? I hesitated for a moment. The dream that had once been mine, before Ethan, before everything, was finally within reach. Yes, I said firmly. I do. 2 weeks passed in a blur. I finalized everything. My resignation at the hospital, the sale of my apartment, the paperwork for my new job. And then, I was gone. Tibet was breathtaking. The air was thinner, the skies clearer, the mountains stretching toward eternity. It was as if I had stepped into another world. The hospital where I would work was small but welcoming. The people were kind. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Until Ethan found me. I had just finished my shift when I saw him standing outside the hospital entrance. He looked different, disheveled, exhausted, his once proud stance slumped. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking. Emily. His voice cracked as he called my name. I stopped. He took a hesitant step forward. Please, just talk to me. I turned to face him. What are you doing here, Ethan? His eyes searched mine. I made a mistake. I was wrong about everything. About you. About us. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. It's a little late for that, don't you think? I don't expect you to forgive me. He swallowed hard. But I need you to know, I love you. I always have. I shook my head. You don't get to say that now. Not after everything. His hands clenched at his sides. I know. But I had to try. Silence stretched between us. Finally, I sighed. Ethan, you need to go home. Home? He let out a hollow laugh. I don't even know where that is anymore. I looked away. That's not my problem. His face fell. Emily, goodbye, Ethan. I turned and walked away, leaving him behind. And for the first time, I didn't look back. The cold wind swept through the small village hospital as I stared at the spot where Ethan had stood. Even though I had walked away, his words lingered in my mind like an unwanted whisper. I don't even know where home is anymore. That wasn't my problem. It wasn't my burden to carry. I had given him my love, my devotion, my entire being for years, and in return, he had shattered me. Now, I was free. And yet. I shook my head, forcing myself to push those thoughts aside. Tibet was my fresh start, my new home, and I wasn't about to let ghosts from my past ruin that. A few days later, as I adjusted to my new life, Jessica called. You won't believe this, she said, her voice laced with amusement and disbelief. Ethan's mother is looking for you. I scoffed. Let me guess. She's furious that I left without properly apologizing for existing? Jessica snorted. Not exactly. She's actually scared. Apparently, Ethan's not doing well. He won't talk to anyone, won't eat, barely leaves his apartment. She even called me, thinking you'd gone back to Beijing. I frowned. That didn't sound like the Ethan I knew. He had always been composed, calculated. Jessica, I said slowly, do you think she's telling the truth? I don't know, Em. But I won't lie, she sounded desperate. Desperate? That woman? The same person who had dismissed me as nothing more than a passing phase in her son's life? The irony would have made me laugh if not for the unsettling feeling settling in my chest. It's not my concern, I finally said. Ethan made his choices. I figured you'd say that. But I thought you should know. We ended the call, and I went about my day, but the conversation lingered in my mind. Was it truly over? Or was there still one final storm to weather? A week later, the storm arrived. I was finishing up an autopsy report when a nurse burst into the room, breathless. Dr. Emily. There's a man outside looking for you. He's refusing to leave. He says his name is Ethan. My pulse skipped. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Ethan? I repeated, feeling a cold dread seep into my bones. She nodded. He looks bad. Really bad. He's been standing in the cold for hours. I tried telling him to go, but he won't listen. I swallowed hard. My hands clenched into fists as I weighed my options. I had sworn to never let him back into my life, to close that door forever. But I wasn't cruel. I wasn't him. Taking a deep breath, I pulled off my gloves and walked outside. Ethan stood there, leaning against a stone pillar, his once impeccable suit wrinkled and damp. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, and for the first time in my life, he looked lost. Emily, he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. I crossed my arms. What are you doing here, Ethan? He exhaled, the condensation from his breath swirling in the cold air. I had nowhere else to go. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. That's not my problem. He flinched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stared at me, something desperate in his gaze. I know I don't deserve anything from you. Not your time, not your pity. But please, just hear me out. I should have walked away. I should have told him to leave and never look back. But against all reason, I nodded. You have 5 minutes. Make it count. Ethan's breath was unsteady, his eyes pleading. I had seen him confident, arrogant, dismissive, but never like this. Emily, he murmured, stepping forward as if he expected me to soften. I don't even know where to start. I didn't move. Then don't. He exhaled sharply. I was a fool. His voice cracked. I let the best thing in my life slip away. I thought Madison, he stopped himself, shaking his head. I thought you were the problem. That we were growing apart because of you. I let out a humorless laugh. And now? His jaw tightened. Now, I know it was me. A flicker of something crossed my chest, anger, maybe. Disgust. I had spent years waiting for him to take accountability, but now that he was, it felt hollow. Ethan, I said, my voice steady, what do you want? He hesitated, eyes searching mine. I want a second chance. I shook my head. You don't deserve one. He flinched. I know. But I can't live with the way things ended. I need to make it right. You can't, I replied, my voice cold. You made your choices. You threw me away like I was nothing. His expression twisted with regret. I never meant to hurt you. I was blind. I let my mother, my career, Madison, everything cloud my judgment. I clenched my fists. And now that you've lost it all, you come crawling back? That's not love, Ethan. That's regret. Silence stretched between us. He had no defense, no counterargument. He just stood there, looking lost. Finally, I sighed. I don't hate you, Ethan. But I don't love you either. Not anymore. A visible tremor ran through him. Emily, I took a deep breath. You need to move on. Just like I have. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I turned, ready to leave him behind for good. But then he whispered, I'll wait for you. I paused for only a second before shaking my head and walking away. He could wait forever. I wasn't coming back. The wind howled through the mountains as I stepped away from Ethan for the last time. Each step felt lighter, as if I had finally shed the weight of years of pain and disappointment. I didn't look back. Jessica was waiting for me near the hospital entrance, arms crossed, worry etched into her features. Are you okay? I nodded. I am now. She exhaled in relief. Good. Because I swear, if you had given that man even a fraction of a chance, I laughed softly. You don't have to worry about that. For the first time in years, I was free. The next few weeks passed in a blur. My work at the hospital became my refuge. I found solace in helping others, in losing myself in something bigger than the ghosts of my past. Jessica and I fell into an easy routine. She ran her flower shop, and I worked my shifts. On weekends, we explored Tibet together, hiking through breathtaking landscapes, rediscovering the world. Rediscovering myself. One evening, as we sat outside her shop watching the sun dip behind the mountains, she nudged me. So, what now? I took a deep breath. I don't know. But for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. She smiled. You deserve this, Em. A fresh start. A life of your own. I nodded. Yeah. I do. Months later, I received a letter. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Ethan. I hesitated before opening it, my fingers lingering on the envelope's edge. Finally, I unfolded the letter. Emily, I know I have no right to write to you. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But I wanted you to know, I'm letting go. For real this time. You were right. What I felt wasn't love, it was regret. And regret isn't enough. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I won't wait for you anymore. I just hope, wherever you are, you're happy. Ethan. I stared at the letter for a long time before folding it and tucking it away. There was nothing left to hold on to. The past was truly behind me now. I stood up, stepping out into the golden light of the setting sun. The road ahead stretched wide and open, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to walk it alone. And this time, it was my choice.